who has he hurt and what has he done wrong that requires such repressive and really cruel and unusual punishment?
Richard Fine has never been convicted of any crime. He has been jailed for a year in solitary confinement with no date for hearing, no bail, and every appeal denied. Former editor of the Los Angeles Daily News, Ron Kay, wants to know why the County of Los Angeles is persecuting this 70-year-old man while turning loose dangerous convicted felons. You'll want to hear what Mr. Kay has to say about LA County, the courts, and our entire judicial system, next on Full Disclosure.
Relentless, probing, fearless. This is Emmy Award-winning Full Disclosure with Leslie Dutton, bringing you the truth by revealing the news behind the news.
Hello, I'm Leslie Dutton. Today on Full Disclosure, we're bringing you the news behind the news in this part one of our interview with Ron Kay, who has tremendous insight about the politics of Los Angeles from his 2 decades as editor for the Los Angeles Daily News. He discovered Richard Fine many years ago.
I do remember a tax case where I hadn't heard of the guy. And I must have seen a small item somewhere and it said Tarzana. And it was Valley paper, the Daily News is based there, and so who is this guy causing all this trouble? And I can remember, more distinctly than the case, I can remember trying to get a reporter to go find out who this guy was, and really having to lean, oh, he's just a crackpot. He's just a big troublemaker. And I said, but he's succeeding in making trouble. Isn't that interesting? Doesn't that make him a newsworthy person if he's winning a tax case that no one else even saw was a problem, that gets enacted by government and imposed on us, and none of us protest, and one guy steps forward and says, this isn't the law, and he prevails. And we did I do remember that story very clearly. Richard Fine was a folk hero, to some people anyway. To others, he was a nuisance. I don't know. I come back to my belief that that's an American right as long as you're not hurting anybody physically or in financially in any way that's illegal and unjust.
We asked him to explain why he thinks the county has incarcerated Mr. Fine for more than a year now.
Fine's personality is difficult. He's a difficult man. He has such strong beliefs, but I thought that was an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in this country that we all shared. If there was anything that brought us all together, it's that phrase. And Richard Fine didn't hurt anybody. He didn't steal anything. He didn't take away from anybody anything. He challenged the legal and judicial system to perform, and their way of dealing with him was to find moral turpitude for his exercise of his civil liberties as an American.
But what did the county have to gain from treating Mr. Fine so harshly? He has been disbarred, his career as a lawyer has been destroyed, he's been ruined economically, and is losing his home. What is driving the sheriff, the judges, and the county board of supervisors to keep punishing this man so relentlessly without any mercy?
Well, I think it's total intimidation. I think that's its whole purpose, is to draw a line of what you can do to pursue your beliefs and to use the law. And I think to a lawyer who has a life and wants to stand up, sees an injustice, sees something wrong, you have to be very circumspect. I think it's very repressive. It's a bullying cop coming down the street and telling people just standing there and talking that he's got his eye on him, and somebody smart talks him and he pops him with his baton. Well, that's a lesson to the whole neighborhood that a tough cop is on the block and not going to let you talk to him and say anything or behave in any way, even though there was no threat, no danger. It's merely somebody saying, why are you giving us a hard time? And I think that's the whole purpose. I think in the end, just to shut Fine up isn't the full explanation. It's a message to every lawyer, to every one of us, of that the system can lock you up as if this was in fact a dictatorship where the rule of law no longer applies. And I think that goes to the heart of what much of the struggle is about in Los Angeles, is the rule of law does not apply. It applies differently to different classes and different people. And I think that's probably the most fundamental question, is whether government will in fact apply the law equally. And if anybody wanted to take up a legal case to fight about that in the 1,000 ways that the law isn't being applied equally, probably Richard Fine would be the one guy you'd go to who would be willing to take up that case and fight with the system. So they win both ways. They shut him up and they send it as a warning to everyone else to be very, very careful.
Mr. K has been reporting on government for a long time. We asked him if he'd ever seen such an outrageous example of government repression. Have you ever seen anything like this?
Not in America. I mean, in countries that have dictatorships and repressive regimes and a lack of freedom, but it's unheard of that somebody would be kept in jail, in virtually incommunicado, for a year without charge, without any accusation, without any ability. I mean, you have to wonder what happened to habeas corpus. It's sort of like Guantanamo, if you ask me, is he's an enemy combatant, and to some degree from the system's point of view, I think he is an enemy combatant. He's attacked the malfeasance and misfeasance in government for years and years. I go back 10 or 15 years when he won tax cases, and I got fascinated. Who is this guy, Richard Fine? And he's a nuisance. I mean, he's a lawyer who's a nuisance because he's fighting for what he believes in, and in fact fighting for the public interest as he perceives it, fighting illegal taxation, and in this case, illegal payments to the judiciary. And his crime is, in fact, that he's a nuisance to the legal system.
The illegal payments to the judiciary Mr. K is referring to are the ongoing payments from Los Angeles County to the LA Superior Court judges, who are supposed to be paid exclusively by the state according to the California Constitution. In February of last year, the California legislature passed a bill authored by the Judicial Council called Senate Bill SBX 211, which granted retroactive criminal immunity to the county supervisors, officials, and judges, so they couldn't be prosecuted for giving and receiving the illegal payments. We asked Mr. K if he thought this ex post facto legislation was an admission that the payments were illegal. As a person who's observed government and society for many, many years as a newspaper editor, have you ever heard of such a breathtaking move?
It's about as naked as they could have gotten, which is to have allowed, supported illegal conduct by people in high places, and then when it's exposed by a single man standing up for what he believes is the truth, to then exonerate and write law that gives immunity to those who had violated the law, and then arrest the person who brought the truth out. I mean, I don't know a more shocking edge to this terrible story of Richard Fine's incarceration than the fact that the system so completely closed ranks to protect, in this case, the criminals, and persecute the person who brought it to light.
In the government, there's a phrase used to restrict access to information. That phrase, need to know. At fulldisclosure.net, we want you to have all the information you need to be an informed citizen, unlimited access to all the information we've gathered on our TV show. And if you can't watch us on your local cable station, streaming video of complete shows when you want them. Fulldisclosure.net, when you need to know the news behind the news.
Welcome back to Full Disclosure and part one of our interview with Ron Kay, former editor of the Los Angeles Daily News. Full Disclosure has been trumpeting this issue since the day Mr. Fine was arrested 1 year ago. We have been alarmed by the stunning silence of the mainstream media. Why hasn't this incredible abridgment of freedom and unmitigated punishment become a national issue? As a former newsman, Mr. K was embarrassed by the lack of interest on the part of his contemporaries.
And I think it's shocking that it's gotten so little attention in the media that he hasn't become a cause célèbre of every American, and certainly everybody in this town. The idea that murderers are being freed from prison without serving their terms, that violent offenders are being freed, that it's routine in the county jail where he's incarcerated for people to get 6 months and be out in 3 days.
We asked Mr. K why he thought the mainstream media hasn't assumed its important role of government watchdog, especially in the case of Richard Fine.
Well, the media is not what it used to be, and I'm a person who believed it was never as much as it could have been, for that matter. But you have a drastic fall-off in resources. You have the Times, which, from an editorial point of view and a staff point of view, has no empathy for the causes of Richard Fine.
It appears that hardened Hispanic criminals get more empathy in the local paper than white Jewish lawyers like Mr. Fine.
They went to bat and made a big story out of this Sanchez guy who was accused of murder, a former gangster, anti-gang worker, and got him freed on huge bail. Tom Hayden went to bat for him, and the left civil libertarian crowd is political as opposed to really believing in the language of freedom and civil liberties and equality under the law. Papers like the Daily News are down to a handful of staff, and every day is just a day to try to get a few stories in the paper.
We pressed the issue. This is a huge story of statewide judicial corruption, starting with the illegal payments, the unabashed legislative cover-up, to the unreasonable persecution and utter destruction of an activist lawyer. Why isn't the media clamoring about this abuse of the legal system?
Can I really explain the media? The media has always been a pack, and if somebody had really picked up the crusade, Steve Lopez in the LA Times, who has a reach and a credibility, if he'd have seen and picked up on the story of the injustice of this, I think it would have snowballed and he would have been freed. And in great part, he's in jail because nobody knows. He's a prisoner without essentially an identity, a visibility, locked up without papers or charges or recourse. It's absolutely one of the most amazing stories that I've ever seen.
How can this happen? The sheriff is holding Mr. Fine in spite of a Supreme Court 5-day limitation. The court has summarily dismissed and denied Mr. Fine's writ of habeas corpus. Politicians are in lockstep with the Judicial Council. Mr. K is angered by the corrosive effect of politics, ruining all aspects of our government.
It's arrived at the place today where general managers of tremendous competence, the best people running city government agencies, are being threatened routinely with firings in public in city council meetings, and 3 days later, the head of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment was fired. Other general managers are being fired. It is completely politicized so that they have no room to do the right thing. They can only do the political thing that serves city government. And you can extend that up to the county in the end. While there is some difference of voices in the county because the county has somewhat more balance between left, right, and center, fundamentally it has got 10-foot walls around that county hall of administration that keep the public out, that keep the press out. No journalist has ever been able to really penetrate what goes on in the county. There are numerous agencies, the health services, the foster children's services. Most of those agencies have been nothing but troubled for decades now. And that's because there's no public scrutiny, a difficulty of getting information, and a lack of a really dynamic political dialogue. 5 supervisors, each one representing 2 million people, able to raise endless amounts of money to keep anybody from challenging them. And then you move it up to the state level, where they've redistricted to the place where only people from the left and right can be elected. and there's no voice from the center to create a dialogue and a balance. So is it any wonder that the state is 10, 20, 30 billion dollars in the red, and take it to the next level to Congress, and we're gridlocked on the simplest things of how do we make the healthcare system a little bit better, and we can't come to any conclusion about these things.
Mr. K has a long reputation for making his voice heard.
An assistant city editor a long time ago came up with the idea, because I was always giving what I thought, and he said, you know, you can't spell wrong without R-O-N, and that became everybody's protection against my excess. Was they knew that I wasn't saying I was right. I was merely saying what I could see, what I thought, what I felt, and it was up to them to implement that in their voice, in their way. And so I was always kind of proud and use it. That's how I feel about it, is I may be right or wrong, educate me. Here's where I'm coming from. And if we have that kind of conversation, then we will educate each other. We will moderate each other's views and find a more sensible path that serves everybody's interest. I thought that was what Thomas Jefferson had to say some years ago, but maybe I was wrong.
His interpretation of the Constitution and the role of the media is entirely in line with the Founding Fathers, and that is what motivates him to pursue his activism, to improve the place where he lives and works.
I mean, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think that LA should be the greatest city in the world. It has myths of unbounded freedom like nowhere else in the world. It's got the most glorious climate, the sense of power of reinvention, of anything's possible. I mean, we ought to be the beacon of light to the world, that people from all over the world can come together and live in peace and relative harmony and prosperity together, and still maintain their own differences and values. And so, I mean, that's my dream. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this just to be a troublemaker. I might do some of it, but I wouldn't do all of it. But I do have a vision of a greater LA.
But apparently it takes a troublemaker to make a greater LA, and the response of the power structure is to throw the troublemakers in jail. We're going to take a quick break right now, and when we come back, Mr. K will explain what he sees as the major obstacles in creating that greater LA he dreams of. We'll be right back.
For the news behind the news, wherever and whenever you want it, go to fulldisclosure.net and get programs on topics affecting you, weekly updates and alerts on hot topics, video streaming of Full Disclosure episodes. It's award-winning, hard-hitting, corruption-fighting news coverage, and it's only available at fulldisclosure.net. Fulldisclosure.net, the news behind the news.
Welcome back to Full Disclosure in part one of our interview with Ron Kay, the former editor of the Los Angeles Daily News. Mr. Fine has been trying to defend himself from his jail cell in pro per. No other lawyer will defend him or help him in any way. They are obviously afraid to criticize the Superior Court judges. But some of them are even critical of his crusade to stop the illegal payments to the judges. Do you think there's any substance to criticism that says he's not going about it in the right way?
Well, it's true. He's not going about it in their way. He's going about it in his way. And that isn't a crime. That is, shouldn't make one subject to incarceration. And I think it goes to the level of control that we expect and conformity, that we really have sold out and are selling out our own basic freedom. We repress each other. The conformity and expectations in our society are enormous, and we hold it against people who look different, act different, even as we piously speak the language of acceptance of everyone no matter what. The truth is, it's no matter what if you play by my rules and the rules of the power system. Mavericks like Richard Fine, are living by a different standard. They're dancing to their own drummer, and I come back to who has he hurt and what has he done wrong. that requires such repressive and really cruel and unusual punishment. I'm a maverick and always had my jobs in jeopardy, but those were my choices and finding where the boundaries were and sometimes overstepping them at my own risk. But what he's done is hardly fits the kind of behavior that has been inflicted upon him.
According to Ron Kay, the Fine case is symptomatic of the corruption that surrounds everyone in America today.
In a very major way, the Fine case exposes just the depths of the system's solidarity to itself and its self-protective nature, because it's a relatively monolithic system. Everybody's one hand is, rubbing every other hand, and with rare exceptions, they remain solidly protecting their own interests.
If this can happen to him, it could happen to anyone.
Well, I think that's the grave danger, and I think it's increasingly a real danger. In a very small way, symptomatic of it is the city council has approved taking everyone's DWP account, which says whether you have a dog or not in a house, because they can't read the meters, and so they have to know where the dogs are, and turning it over to animal services to be able to see if you've licensed your dog. Now, the 60% of the people who live in apartments don't have that problem because they don't go on to their personal area of property. They go onto the building. They don't know who has a dog or doesn't have a dog. So it's a targeted exercise in taking information that is in fact confidential. I can't get a hold of your bill. Why does Animal Services to do something not related to your bill? And I think it's a perfect example of the kind of thing that government is doing in all kinds of ways that we don't know about. Is they're using the information, and they have vast amounts of information about us, to be able to use it in ways that are not to our best interest, that aren't fair, that aren't open, aren't transparent. And I think the lack of transparency is the heart of what's broken.
As citizens, giving money to judges in violation of the state constitution and their judicial canons of ethics would give us grounds to sue the county and the Superior Court for misappropriation of funds, wouldn't it?
Well, I don't have any doubt that that's true. At this point, I think getting Richard Fine freed would be the #1 goal and the #1 challenge, and I hope that the first anniversary of his being incarcerated without charge will be a chance to raise the consciousness of the public and to bring attention to this. And if that would happen and he could be freed, I think we could pursue the other issues involved in this. But it is very, very hard to mobilize public opinion for anything that's a little bit abstract or doesn't affect them directly. The wink and the nod by which these illegal payments were made for this length of time and then immunized would be tough to fix. And I think that's Richard Fine's crusade to do that and relentlessness about it is he was probably the only person with enough intensity, passion, and drive to never let go. He was a pit bull about the law and wouldn't let go. And they finally came down on him because that was the last refuge, the last way they could go about bringing him under control, was to completely silence him.
So what is the best course of action for citizens who are concerned about this situation, we ask him?
Well, I think they really need to pay attention, first of all, and watch the videos you've produced and get some information so that it's clear in their own head that this is a great injustice, and if they can do it to Richard Fine, they can do it to any of us who stands up for what we believe in. And then I think the first step is to get an email address, email the sheriff, email the county supervisors, email the leaders that you can find. I get hundreds of emails a day. It's become the hardest part of my day, is just sorting through emails, trying to respond to everybody. There's a sort of ombudsman's role that's evolved where people ask me to solve problems that I really don't have the personal ability to do, even if I just don't know how to do it. But it's all part of creating a new LA, a new spirit of LA, and new institutions, and I think they are really growing.
If you want to help free Richard Fine, here are some email addresses that you can contact. Los Angeles Sheriff Leroy Baca, Mike Giannacco, who's the directing attorney of the Office of Independent Review, and Merrick Bobb, a police monitor who's president of the Police Assessment Resource Center and monitors the jails. You can email him too.
And make your voice heard and don't be passive to it. I do a show once a week on NBC called The Filter with Fred Rogan, where I'm a commentator and usually along with Deborah Skelton, who's an actress and entertainer, and we have a lot of fun in our 10 minutes. And I've been doing radio once a week on Kevin James' show on KRLA for about 20 minutes. I'm sure you are building channels for direct expression to them and to participate. Every voice, and I've seen it in my civic engagement, you know, you get a couple of hundred emails and phone calls into these officials, and when they've been getting none, and they wake up and think there's a trend. One of the great lessons of civic activism is the teachings of a great community organizer named Saul Alinsky, who I met in college in the 60s, and his motto was, it doesn't matter how much power you have, it matters how much power they think you have. So if you can give them the thought that we are organized, that we have power, that we care, that we will not tolerate injustice, I think free Richard Fine may just happen.
We want to thank Ron Kay for appearing on Full Disclosure today. We want to know what you, the viewers, think. Do you think that the Richard Fine case deserves greater attention from the media and the public? Please call our Full Disclosure Town Hall number at 1-800-867-7777. That's 1-800-867-7777. And if you leave your name and number, we'll get back to you. Or you can log on to our website at fulldisclosure.net and leave your opinion there. And if you leave your email address, we'll be happy to respond. I'm Leslie Dutton. Please join us next time for part 2 of this interview with Ron Kay. That's coming up next on another edition of Full Disclosure. Thank you.
To respond to this question or comment on this program, please call 800-867-7777 or visit fulldisclosure.net. Transcripts or DVD copies of this program are also available on our website. Full Disclosure, the news behind the news.
If this can happen to him, it could happen to anyone.
Well, I think that's the grave danger, and I think it's increasingly a real danger.
Jailed for a year, no hearing date, no bail, no hope for release. Could you wind up like Richard Fine if you bring action against the government? A former editor of a Los Angeles newspaper thinks so. Find out why, next on Full Disclosure.
Relentless, probing, fearless. This is Emmy Award-winning Full Disclosure with Leslie Dutton, bringing you the truth by revealing the news behind the news.
Hello, I'm Leslie Dutton. Today on Full Disclosure, we're bringing you the news behind the news in this part 2 of our interview with Ron Kay, who was the editor of the Los Angeles Daily News for almost 3 decades. He's very familiar with the political prisoner, Richard I. Fine, who was disbarred for his aggressive representation as a taxpayer's advocate. We asked him what he thought of the attorneys representing a big developer who accused Mr. Fine of being a bully.
I don't know what the statute is on bullying. I suppose if bully in some place in a physical way, it would be an assault. But he didn't assault anybody. He used the law as an instrument for fighting for what he believed in. And we don't have to agree with Richard Fine in order to admire both his courage, determination, and his passion for his causes and his right to fight for it. And the fact that he's tied up the developer and made their life miserable, it was within the law. He didn't go and damage their property and do things that were extra legal. And the fact that one man can bully a wealthy developer is really the attitude of our political and governmental system. That's how they treat us all in some way. We're seeing in Los Angeles every day the use of power to suppress the yearnings of the people, whether it's in neighborhood councils or in any aspect of the city. You're either part of the machinery and a friend and on the inside and supporting them in what they're doing, and if you're outside of what they're doing and opposing it, then you are an enemy to be dealt with by what I think is worse than bullying, which is the repressive tactics that government, with all of its power, can inflict on people and organizations. And that's become routine, certainly in this city.
Why, we ask him, how is it that a LA County government, supposedly run by the people, can bully its citizens?
The trouble we have in LA is it's a one-party system. It's fundamentally no different than the Russian Kremlin system or the German system under the Nazis. It is under the control of single entities. It's benign relative to that. They've only incarcerated Richard Fine and taken our money and squandered it. But it is fundamentally the same. It is a controlled system, and anybody who gets in its way, anybody who stands up to it, puts themselves at risk. If you're looking for jobs, if you're looking for opportunity, if you're looking for support, the system represses you. It represses council members who stand up to the system and challenge it.
What caused LA politics to become so repressive?
Historically, the great problem in LA is that there were very few democratic institutions at the grassroots level. Party structures didn't go deep. Even towns like Chicago had block captains and ward healers so that people did have somebody to get to who they knew, a face, a real person, a relationship, to be able to get things done. In LA, that's never existed. Our civic institutions are very weak. The civic elite is almost non-existent in its influence. The business community is very, very weak. And so historically, the political system and the people who profit from it, labor, contractors, consultants, developers, it really came together to form what is a political machine. And it's most intense in the city, but it's also there in the county very strongly. And it doesn't have to change. Systems don't change if there's no pressure to change.
Unmotivated to change, the recent regimes in LA haven't made any difference in controlling the power of the contractors and the developers who see local government as a cash cow, whose main purpose is to feed and perpetuate their empires.
I think Reardon's election in '93 represented a reaction to what was going on, but he wasn't able to really follow through on an agenda because the rest of the political system was opposed to what he stood for. And I think since him, we've seen a very passive government in Hahn. Despite charter reform, nothing really changed. And then we've seen with Villaraigosa what I think is just an incredible disappointment, where we have gone from a passive sort of feeding at the trough of city government into active participation in getting their hands on every cent that the city has.
Mr. K sees this frenzy feeding at the government trough as a driving force of corruption in our government.
I think American government has been taken hostage by special interests on the left, the right, of business, of labor, And it's in the end, it's the public's fault. We think we can watch television and go about our lives as if we don't have to be involved and responsible citizens. And I think that's what has happened, and I think it's what's changing in the economic crisis as people are seeing the elderly are seeing their life savings endangered, and the expectation of 60, 70 years of life that they'd have a certain lifestyle in their old age threatened and endangered. Their children who grew up expecting to have a certain kind of life are seeing their incomes going down and not being able to afford all the luxuries and things that they expected. And so we're borrowing. We're borrowing and borrowing, and who's getting the bill? The people under 30 who have iPods in their ears and think that life is just a bowl of cherries. They have a rude awakening coming, I believe.
In the government, there's a phrase used to restrict access to information. That phrase, need to know. At fulldisclosure.net, we want you to have all the information you need to be an informed citizen, unlimited access to all the information we've gathered on our TV show, and if you can't watch us on your local cable station, streaming video of complete shows when you want them. Fulldisclosure.net, when you need to know the news behind the news.
Welcome back to Full Disclosure and part 2 of our interview with Ron Kay, former editor of the Los Angeles Daily News. For months we have requested the sheriff to allow us to interview Mr. Fine in the jail, and for months Sheriff Baca has denied our request. We know that the LA Times reporter Victoria Kim was granted an interview and wanted to know what Mr. Kay thought was the reason why Full Disclosure was being prevented from getting an on-camera interview in jail.
The sheriff's department's never been open. It's always been very difficult. Again, if you have really good relations because you're doing really softball stuff for government or institutions that they'll trust, then you get more access than somebody who's going to be trouble, who may not tell the story the way they like the story told. And that's true of all government. It's very, very selective.
We asked him why he thought the LA Times was granted access to Mr. Fine and Full Disclosure was denied.
At a newspaper, you have reporters who do get along very well with people in authority, get the news, get the story, and then you have to bring in some people who are very contrarian, who have an eye for seeing things broken and glasses half full. And so you play good guy, bad guy with them to be able to get the access that you need. But institutionally, at a paper like the Daily News, we had a tenth the amount of access as the LA Times. The LA Times is the dominant and has been the dominant institution. It pretty much gets what it wants. It has the lawyers to be able to fight about it, and it has the ability to hurt the institution, the sheriff, whoever, in a way that no other institution does. And I think when it comes to repressive systems, it really comes down to how much you can help them and how much can you hurt them. And only the LA Times can hurt him.
We asked Mr. Kay where he thought the denial was originating. Do you think that the judges are pressuring the sheriff, or is the sheriff doing this to curry favor with the judges, or what?
Well, I'm not a big believer in conspiracies, but I do believe there are conspiracies of consciousness, that we get on the same page and we understand the interests. We understand the interest and we come to an agreement without anybody talking about it. The sheriff has to do business with the county supervisors for his budget. He has to do business with the judges all the time. He has to do business with the district attorney's office. They're all part of a single machinery. I don't know how much they sit there and talk about, let's get this Richard Fine. I don't think they have to. It's understood that if he was to say, I have to release this man because I need the bed, because I have overcrowded jails and I don't have paperwork on why he should be held here, I think he would get a lot of problems. Whether anybody confronted him, I'm sure he'd get a call or two telling him he was out of line, but mostly he would face an uphill struggle every time there was a gray area in a deputy's action in a case that they were making. judges would see them in a dim light and teach him a lesson. That's how systems like the LA system work. It isn't just a backroom deal, although that goes on. It's mostly the rewards and punishments that are dispensed because you're onside or offside.
Mr. Kay brought up an interesting point regarding the politics of judicial selection.
I mean, one of the really key things in this is how judges have been selected in Los Angeles for a long, long time. And it goes to the influence of PR lobbyist, political operative Joe Sorrell, who was the #1 consultant to get judges elected, would audition judges and pick the ones that he felt should be on the bench for whatever reasons, and would help them raise the money they needed and get the advertising and the support that they needed. So most judges were really picked by Joe Sorrell, who's no more dishonorable than anybody else. He's doing his job. But at the same token, that's not how judges should be selected. There should be some process by which the word does get out. But in the paper, it was impossible to interview all the judges and have an intelligent determination of who to support. It's a specific task that has to do with legal skills, background. You really rely on the Bar Association for rating. So just how judges are selected, and it itself is a corrupt process. It's not a dynamic process with lots of different voices making a determination. And I don't know how most people vote, but I go in there and bring every prejudice I have in all directions of who I'm going to vote for based more or less on the name and the ballot ID, unless I actually know something about the judge. And so a little bit of advertising that raises your awareness that so-and-so's name registers gives them a huge advantage to the fact that I'm willing to bet you 99% of the people who go to the voting booth don't know the first thing about the people they're voting into judgeships.
To support their re-election campaigns, appellate court judges hold events. Attending these events are the large law firms who are obviously attempting to curry favor with these appellate judges, expecting favorable rulings from the bench. Isn't this some kind of conflict of interest?
I think it's deeper even than a conflict. Many of the judges come out of those big law firms. Those big law firms are big and have tremendous reaches and tentacles into city and county government as outside counsel, a nice lucrative business, who bring cases and have influence. That's why when you're trying to influence something, you go to the big law firms because they have the most access, the most influence, and the most control over not just the judgeships, but of all the politicians. The lawyers contribute more money and have a greater stake in the outcome. There are law firms that specialize in representing people who want to do business in the city and county, where billions of dollars in business are done. They're very, very powerful interests, and the average lawyer doesn't make any more difference than the average citizen. Doesn't really matter what you think. You're drowned out by the big voices with all the money.
The Judicial Council wrote Senate Bill SBX 211, which gave retroactive criminal and civil immunity to the judges and county officials who would continue to pay and receive the payments which are specifically prohibited by the state constitution. This seems to show the close relationship between the lawmakers and the judges who judge the laws. This appears to be collusion here in California rather than separation of powers as intended by the Constitution.
Well, I don't have any doubt about it. Is who makes the laws, he who writes the laws, gets to do whatever they want. And the judiciary is part of the system. Cases challenging government come before them. There are occasional judges who will stand up and take a hard and real look, but there's a lot of other judges that'll just look the other way at the failures of government at all levels. It's broken down the system There are special rules. The rule on public corruption is incredibly soft when it comes to government officials, that the level of proof virtually requires to have them publicly admit that they took money to do a favor or have a recording of it, whereas from the private sector, you can be prosecuted on circumstantial evidence. So, I mean, the laws are written very much to protect the political apparatus and the political figures by the people who are the political figures and the apparatus. And that goes to the lack of balance in our society, in the fact that the government is the party of the first part and the people are the party of the second part. And it doesn't really matter ideology as much as you're part of the system.
Are we fighting the losing battle? There seems to be no end to the corruption around us. We keep struggling to show how Mr. Fine is a modern-day Paul Revere attempting to awaken the people to stand up and take back their California court system. Full Disclosure has even filed a lawsuit to force the sheriff to allow us into the jail to interview Mr. Fine. Are we spinning our wheels for no apparent good?
Full Disclosure has done an incredible job to even keep the story of Richard Fine alive. No one else has done that. You're dangerous. If they let you in, you're going to tell a story that lets Richard Fine communicate and tell what's going on, to become a face, a real person. And that's the most powerful thing in journalism. All this, Stalin of all people has the most famous quote on the subject: 1 million deaths is a statistic, but one death is a tragedy. And you can talk about all these things abstractly, but letting Richard Fine from jail talk directly into a camera and talk about his experience to become a human being, to be able to communicate in his own words, and to see him visually as he does it, to judge for yourself the man. Well, that's a very, very dangerous thing to a system that is in fact persecuting a man who has done nothing wrong.
For the news behind the news, wherever and whenever you want it, go to fulldisclosure.net and get programs on topics affecting you. Weekly updates and alerts on hot topics, video streaming of Full Disclosure episodes. It's award-winning, hard-hitting, corruption-fighting news coverage. And it's only available at fulldisclosure.net. Fulldisclosure.net, the news behind the news.
Welcome back to Full Disclosure in part 2 of our interview with Ron Kay, who has formed a couple of new organizations specifically to give people a voice and an identity to win back control of their local government. In the past, the people as individuals had no voice unless they could arouse the interest of the media.
Well, it's changing. The internet is the most powerful tool, the most powerful weapon for freedom that ever existed. Whatever your beliefs are, and you have the ability to get the word out. I'm writing a blog that certainly challenges the city and its thing, and uses documents, uses their own words in council meetings, uses interviews, uses every tool that I have to bring to light, and there's a huge following. It's influential because it sheds light into the darkness. It creates a context for people to actually understand how the pieces all fit together. And so it's part of a vast network of blogs and news sites and individuals and organizations that are challenging the system. What we're seeing, and I think the recession, which is the worst economic catastrophe to hit the city, nation, and the world since the Great Depression 80 years ago, is awakening people. And I'm out in the community, have been since I left the Daily News for 2 years, and working with activists. And I tell everybody, we don't have to agree on anything except our right to be heard, to have an impact, to be free and empowered American citizens.
Aware of the large number of advocates for the homeless and disadvantaged, Mr. Kay is encouraging the silent majority underrepresented middle class to stand up for themselves.
Most of us live in some kind of a home, and grave injustices are being perpetrated on us all the time. Overdevelopment, the selling off of rights and trampling on community interests, the lack of planning. I mean, I could probably list hundreds of violations of the fundamental rights of ordinary people of all races, classes, religions, and belief systems. It's got nothing to do with it. It has to do with the people who obey the laws are treated and persecuted in a way that people who disobey the laws are not.
Such as Mr. Fine, sitting in jail for a year, while people convicted of violent crimes are set free every day, having served little or no time. Mr. K is using his energies to motivate people to get involved in taking back their government.
My favorite truth about my life today is I've never worked so hard for money as I am for love. But the joy of being older, of not having a job, of not trying to earn any money, is to be able to speak freely, to really find your voice as yourself. And I've been blogging at ronkla.com for most of 2 years and do pretty substantial traffic, about 1,500 unique visitors a day, and 30, 40 comments on most of the items, which are usually more interesting than what I write because it's real people telling me I'm crazy or telling me I'm right or saying what they believe. And so there's a conversation going on, and I believe that a public conversation, as a journalist, as a person who believes that information is power and that it's the First Amendment that protects our right to free speech and freedom of the press and freedom of belief and religion, is to create that conversation where we can begin to understand each other, where we can begin to give a little and take a little. And so I developed a nonprofit community-based news website called OURLA.org, OurLA.org, to simplify that this is our LA, not their LA, which is the heart of my belief that we have to take back this town.
He has founded a citizens group which is growing every day.
Not long after I left the paper and retired, I founded the Saving LA Project. It was actually the Saving LA protest on Bastille Day in 2008, but it evolved very quickly into the Saving LA Project. And we meet once a month. We try to be a loose-knit umbrella group to raise the debate from the local issues that preoccupy, to get people to see that their issues are all interconnected, that we're all one city, and that we can come together and take power from them. And then we can fight about the differences between us as equals. And that's very different than the situation that exists today.
Mr. K is optimistic about the future of Los Angeles.
The neighborhood councils, for all that's wrong with them, have achieved a lot against a system that doesn't want them to succeed. They have a long way to go, but there are, I talk to community groups, to service clubs, to homeowner groups. These are all elements of a revolution. Every cell of activism, of caring, of good works is something that's contributing to the civic culture. And the belief I have is that they're slowly coming together. They're slowly getting to find out about the group down the block, and that we can get along with you and work on a project together. That we're beginning to understand one another. That as community organizations like SLAP and the Neighborhood Council coalitions bring people together from all parts of the city, there gets to be an understanding that cuts across demographic and geographic lines. And so I think a new Los Angeles is being born in the ashes of what we have here. I think it's got to get a lot worse before it gets better. And that, sadly to say, catastrophe is what usually causes great changes. And I think we are heading into a catastrophe that could really make this into like a Detroit or a city of nothing but rich and poor and nothing in between, and demoralization on one side and unbelievable luxury on the other. And the middle class has been under siege. The numbers have fallen and fallen over the last 20 years, quite dramatically. A 50% increase in poverty in the valley in the 90s. the census that's underway now will not show good things for Los Angeles. There's no question that poverty is worse, and that the middle class is smaller, and it's got nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with opportunity, safety, good schools, the basics that people value, which is the quality of their lives and the opportunity for themselves, and the belief that their children should have more opportunity than they had. That's not revolutionary. That's real basic stuff that great cities are built out of. And I think LA is on the cusp of having to make a choice about itself. I know from my own direct experience that there is an awakening occurring across the city, that people are beginning to see the consequences of indifference, of apathy, and of defeatism. And there's a lot more fight out there than there was a year and a half, 2 years ago. People are getting better organized, and the system is quite aware that they are in peril, and they are fighting for themselves, unfortunately, and not for us.
We want to thank Ron Kay for appearing on Full Disclosure today. We want to know what you, the viewers, think. Do you see corruption in your community, and are you willing to stand up and fight it? Let us know what's happening in your community. Please call us at our Full Disclosure Town Hall number at 1-800-867-7777. That's 1-800-867-7777. And if you leave your name and number, we'll be happy to get back to you. Or you can log on our website at fulldisclosure.net and leave your opinion there. If you leave your email address, we'll be happy to respond. I'm Leslie Dutton. Please join us next time for another edition of Full Disclosure. Thank you.
To respond to this question or comment on this program, please call 800-867-7777 or visit fulldisclosure.net. Transcripts or DVD copies of this program are also available on our website. Full Disclosure, the news behind the news.